Do you know how expensive it is to age in place, to get older? Well, we have an amazing guest today that is going to talk about how to plan for long-term care. Stick around.
Welcome to Senior Care Made Simple, an elder care podcast, your guide to navigating home health care with confidence. Hosted by Andrea Albertini, founder and CEO of Horizon Care Services, an industry leader in private duty home care in South Florida. To learn more, visit horizoncareservices.com.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Doris, my co-host.
Hello, everybody.
And we also have an amazing guest today, and her name is Genevieve George. And we are going to talk about how expensive it is to age in place. A lot of people do not plan to live longer, or they just don't think about it. I mean, I have seen so many people along the way, you work, you don't spend time in, putting $100 away, $200 or whatever the case may be. You know what I mean? And it comes a time that all of a sudden either an emergency happened that you can't work, or it comes a time that now mom and dad are aging. Did they plan for it? Do you know if mom and dad plan for long-term care? Do you know if they have stocks? Do you know if they have a financial planner? Do you know if they have a retirement plan? Do you know what they have? So we're going to talk about it today, how important it is for young adults to also make sure they start planning.
It's a sensitive topic if you think about it, especially in my culture, the Hispanic community. It's very sensitive to go to your parents and ask, Mom, did you plan for getting sick? Did you plan ahead? So this is a very important topic that we need to focus on wherever as a parent, as a mother, even as a sibling, you need to focus on this. And thank you for being with us today.
Yes, thank you for having me. I agree with you. It is a really sensitive topic, and it's difficult to have that conversation, but it is really helpful. Everybody in this room has probably seen it go both ways, but it's very helpful when the parents are willing to share that information with the children so that they can have a plan in place. And then it doesn't become an emergency and a scramble all at the same time.
Exactly. And I have seen both sides, actually. I have seen the parents don't have any plans at all. And now the children can't afford it either. So then what happens?
Correct. I will say my experiences, okay? We're 5 sisters. My father went into dialysis and he suffered a stroke and they took him in. And we're 5 sisters sitting there and we had to make a decision because he was brain dead. The first thing my mother said was, I'm not making this decision. You do it. And we were like, really? Have you ever thought about this? Nothing. She couldn't think straight. We were all under the stress and the situation. If we would have planned prior to the event, we would have had decisions to make. We had to sit there and try to make decisions. And to make a decision, 5 is an odd number.
Yeah.
So we didn't agree. So in order to avoid that, what do we need to do?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is when we're sitting here today, we're talking about planning for multiple parts of that. Planning for their wishes. Because had that conversation happened, you might have known, okay, my dad does not want us to just keep him on this machine forever. That would have been a helpful conversation to have on the front end. What are their wishes? That was a fairly quick transition, if I understand correctly.
Yes.
But in other cases, the process might be slower and you have a little bit of time to have that conversation, but it's still important to say, okay, Mom, Dad, what do you want? If you're given the choice, are you okay with an assisted living facility or nursing home, or would you prefer in-home care? Having that conversation helps the kids, because if Mom or Dad comes to a point where they can't tell you that anymore, you're making that decision and they may have wanted something different.
Correct.
But then the other side of that is all of those things cost money. right? So what is the plan for that? Do they have assets to cover that? What are the resources there? And I've seen some situations where families are very closed off. They don't want to share that, whether that's because that's just how they were raised or whatever the case may be. They don't want to share that data with their children. And so they're maybe talking, hopefully, with a professional about it, but they're not sharing it with their children. But if they are comfortable sharing with their children, I'm sure you've seen it go a lot smoother.
Absolutely.
Because the child can come in and say, okay, I have power of attorney. My parent is no longer able to make these decisions. I have power of attorney, but I know this is what they wanted. And they can reach out to a company like yours and get that care that their parent wanted and carry out those wishes. And they're kind of in a position where they're not having to make decisions about that because the parent has already shared that with them. And that is so powerful because, it's already so upsetting for the family. You and your mom and your 4 siblings sitting there having to have this conversation. That's already so upsetting. And then to not have a plan makes it even harder.
Right? It was very hard.
Yeah. I'm sorry to have to rehash that with you, but it's an important story to share with people because that's the other side of it. There wasn't a discussion and you all had to come together and make that decision together. And when you don't agree, what does that do to the relationships too? Because one has a differing opinion. And, if there's a clear plan in place, both on the communication of their wishes as well as the financial piece, it makes it a lot smoother for all the remaining parties as well.
Absolutely. So another question I have to ask you, we were 5. Out of the 5, let's say my father would have made a plan and would have called you and said, listen, I want to have a plan. Out of the 5, you can't make everybody make the decision. How does that function as to who would make the decisions for them?
Yeah, a couple different things there. I mean, that is about having estate documents in place and a healthcare surrogate. So in that situation, having to make the decision about their health, what do we do with that in this situation? That there should have been a healthcare surrogate assigned, and that would have been a part of anybody's standard estate planning package. But then on the financial side of it, you have a power of attorney, and those are not always the same person. But there's somebody there to help make sure the bills are still getting paid, has access to the accounts, can have those communications. Where right now, if I have a client and they haven't said, you can share my information with my child, I cannot unless they come to me and say, Mom and Dad are incapacitated and here's the power of attorney. So it's having to open up those lines of communication too, because it's very helpful when somebody, especially that maybe has forethought on aging, is including their children in their meetings, financial planning meetings and discussions, estate planning. They've shared their documents with them and they've really gotten that information out there.
We have had issues where the patient doesn't have, our patient doesn't have a healthcare surrogate yet. So now there is children involved, but the children are fighting over the money and who's going to be the trustee or who's going to be the representative, right? What I recommend for, I know a lot of people are younger that's listening to my podcast, is I would recommend the children to get a guardian. And we're going to talk about guardianship at some point in time in our show. A lot of people think that getting a guardian is bad. It is not, because the guardian could follow their wishes.
Right. So what you're describing is making sure Mom and Dad have their estate planning package in order that assigns all of that, right? What do they really want to happen, not just on the health side, but who do they want making those financial decisions, who they want to be the executor, I think is what you were saying, that your husband served in that role, should they pass, and really having that in place. But then to the children of those people, also having your ducks in a row. I mean, that is something that when I have somebody that's, in my peer group talking to me about financial planning, that's one of my first questions. Do you have estate documents? Because, life can end quickly, no matter what age you are.
Absolutely.
And I've seen it both ways, really well-planned estates that flow well because that's already been put in place. And I've seen the other where there weren't, people thought they were still young and healthy, and then something happened suddenly and there was no plan. And now your family is grieving and they are having to deal with like so much extra stuff to get get the finances back in order and distributed in the right direction. And it's difficult. And, so as much as I can preach that when I'm working with clients is even if you don't think you need it, get your estate documents in order. And it doesn't have to be overcomplicated. It doesn't have to be super expensive, but you just want to have it so that you're relieving your remaining family members of that one piece of grief.
So I have a question for
Please.
you. Financial planning, let's say me, I want to work with you as to financial planning, but I want to set aside money for home health care. I don't want my daughters to be burdened with my care. So let's say, I want to hire Horizon. I want them to do my groceries, my cleaning, everything, all the services. How do you allocate that in your financial planning?
So what we see if somebody is coming to us and we're talking about financial planning, we see this interesting reverse bell curve in their spending. So if somebody is retiring, we sometimes see their spending go up a bit because now they have all this extra time, right? So they're traveling and they're living their life and they're doing all the things that they wanted to do in retirement. And then they sort of get to a point where they've done all the travels and they're just sort of doing their thing. And then we see the expenses come back up because of healthcare expenses. And so it's a matter of making sure that we incorporate that and understanding, okay, do they have any kind of long-term care insurance? And does incorporating that into the plan and what will that not cover so we can make sure that that's there. But, I'm sure you can both speak to this even better than I can, but some long-term care events are short. Some can extend on for a decade, and that can be detrimental to the financial plan. So it's really a matter of having that conversation. Okay, what is your health? How much do you want to plan for? What are your wishes? Because that really falls into, okay, what dollar amount do we want to sort of earmark for that long-term care event should it happen? And then, I don't sell products, but there are other insurances to help sort of backs up some of that in some cases, but not everybody's eligible for that, or maybe they're planning for it too late. So it's just a matter of understanding what their wishes are and trying to incorporate that into the overall financial plan. And sort of, I like the idea of earmarking assets.
Oh, absolutely. You really don't want to burden your loved ones with taking care of you when you could plan ahead and earmark a certain amount of money or whatever, you recommend. And then that can take over once you are disabled, if you are disabled.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. So definitely having a plan in place and having a discussion about what you want that to be, because in some families are not going to have the assets to have in-home care or to go to a facility, and they will end up in their child's home. But what are the plans for providing care in that home too, especially if the child is still working or whatever the case may be? So, there's something to plan for everybody.
Absolutely.
And even if it is Medicaid planning, which is not most people's ideal situation, but there is a way to plan for that.
Thank you.
Right. And one of the things that, I think it's so important, again, a lot of the people who are listening to the podcast are younger people. How about you talk to your parents?
That's right.
And say, hey, did you think about, do you have long-term care insurance? Do you have a life insurance policy? There is some life insurance policy that you can actually borrow against it, or you can pay yourself out to use it for long-term care. Either is for private duty or either going into an assisted living, So how about you guys doing that? And then if they say, no, I worked all my life, I haven't had a chance to plan for, then what are you going to do? I mean, should you then think, wow, maybe I should do something for my mom or for my dad? If they use it, fine. If they use it, not. But maybe you got to think about it and you got to talk to your siblings, because I have spoke to siblings who actually, they all got together and they actually did a financial planning for their parents' retirement. So instead of buying gifts, all this kind of things, it's a great idea for the siblings to get together and create that long-term care fund for their parents.
Mm-hmm. That's not easy.
No, it's not. It's not easy.
No, it's not.
Good luck with that one.
And I think a lot of it comes back down to the communication. Are the parents willing to share that information with them? And let's say they do say, okay, I do have an insurance policy or I have long-term care. Then you got to go deeper with your research.
Oh, for
and
sure.
How does that policy work? What's triggering the the payouts? Is it a reimbursement policy, or is it once we have a triggering event, you're receiving a monthly amount, and then what is the differential between what you're receiving from long-term care and what you actually have to pay out for health care, which in most cases, people are not 100% insured for long-term care.
Right.
So it's really diving into the details of that. And then in a case where maybe they don't have a policy, they might have some assets, you still also need to understand the nature of those assets, because there's tax implications to withdrawals, and you need to be having a good open communication with the advisor. To say, okay, what's the allocation for those dollars? Is there an adequate cash reserve? We now know mom or dad are in need of care, and this is what it's costing monthly, and we're going to need to pull that from the portfolio, and we need to understand what that looks like.
No, absolutely. And, it's interesting. Sometimes, most of the time we get either the people who request our services when it comes to private duty is either the children, 50% children, and 50% the physician or hospital case manager that call us and say, I have a client who needs 24-hour care, which a lot of times we still have to talk to the children, right? Mm-hmm. So it's, and sometimes the parents planned, but they haven't, right? So, but they are the power of attorney. Yeah. And then we're like, so usually we say, have you thought about, planning for yourself? Do you have plan for yourself? Well, I'm, I just recently married. I have young children, and it's always, I think a lot of people are afraid of the unknown. It doesn't cost any money to sit down with someone like you, financial planner, to be able to say, hey, what can I do? How much do I need? And so on and so on. It's free. So I will always recommend reach out. The more you know, the better you are, because we do come across sometimes of a lot of children who needs care for their loved ones, but they can't afford it.
Yeah, we're a prime example. I just said we're 5 sisters. My parents didn't plan. Okay, so now we have a 94-year-old mother. We take turns taking care of her, and we all work. So it's like I hate to say this, but it's a burden on everybody. Sure. We're the sandwich generation. That if my parents would have called you or called a financial planner, would have made arrangements, it wouldn't be so time, all the, everything that comes with the stress of taking care of a parent.
Yeah, and what you're both describing is what I would call like financial self-care for the children. Right? Because in the sandwich generation, they may now be responsible for, at the very least, making decisions for mom and dad, but possibly for providing additional care as well, and taking time out of their days that they're maybe not at work or not with their own family. And, they need to take it upon themselves to make sure they're also okay for the future, right? Especially if it's an extended long-term
correct
event. So okay, I'll, for yourself, we'll just use you as the example. You're taking care of mom, you're working full time, and you're having to fit all of that in. I would recommend you should be talking with your advisor too, because if you have to, if you are in a position where you had to take a step back from work and to provide more of that care, what does that look like for your long-term plan? And not long-term care plan, but your long-term financial plan. And are there other things that we can do to help fill in those gaps? And I think sometimes, we're so, but I consider myself in the sandwich generation as well, taking care of young kids and, one day probably taking care of parents as well. It's important that we're taking care of our own financial future, in addition to understanding what we need to do for our parents and for our children. And some people might feel, and now I'm definitely not talking about you, but some people might feel I'm not ready to talk to a financial advisor. I don't have enough money to do financial planning. And I firmly believe that is not true. There's an advisor out there for any wealth level. And there are individuals that want to help you to plan for this. And I think my biggest thing to say is just like, be brave. You have to go out there and ask the questions. You don't know what you don't know. So if you don't start the process and understand where the gaps are, you can't understand what you need to do to fill them, right? And to make that plan for the future. And that is so important because especially for the sandwich generation, because they might have instances where they're pulled away from their own ability to contribute to the financial future.
That is amazing. I have an analogy here.
Okay, please.
So when you get in an airplane and, you go through the, in case of an emergency, you take the mask and you put it on yourself first, and then you take care of somebody else. When you said financial self-care, that came into my mind. You have to take care of you first. Your financial self-care first, whether you're wealthy or you're not, or whatever the case may be, and then you can work on protecting the rest of your loved ones. Love that. I'm going to use that. That's a great
you're
marketing
welcome
tool.
to use it. It's easier said than done
Yes.
because if your parent is in need of care or help or whatever it is, you're showing up, right?
Correct.
And you're probably not taking it. Well, hold on, I have to meet with my financial advisor before I show up over there to help you. So it is easier said than done, but it's important to be thinking about all aspects because at some point in the future, that parent won't be here anymore. That's inevitable, right?
Right.
And then where are you at, right? Are you able to return to the workforce? Are you able to continue to contribute to your own long-term financial future? And what does that look like? Or just understanding what your options are.
Yes,
there.
absolutely.
When I'm working with clients that of any age, especially on the planning side, what I say is I don't want anybody holding more risk than they have to. But if I know what the goals are, we know what the trajectory is, and checking and savings account interest rates aren't going to get you there, then you have to know what the other options are. And, in the last couple of years, we've had favorable interest rates where people are comfortable getting, at one point it was 5% on their cash. But prior to that, it was almost nothing.
Yes.
So you needed your dollars to work harder for you. I mean, you needed to do more than inflation at least. But, in a lot of cases, when you're looking at the trajectory and inflation and all of that, you need the dollars to work a little harder for you than just checking and savings. Now, you still want a cash reserve.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't want you to not have any dollars in your checking and savings accounts, but we want to make sure that, I don't want any client holding more risk than they really need to achieve their goals. But, and then you have the other end of that. You have clients where they have more than enough assets to provide for their long-term care, and you start talking about dollars being for the next generation. And then there's a different allocation that's appropriate for the next generation as well. Yeah, and that's important on the front end. What are we saving while we're in our earning years? But when we're talking about, your patients and clients, they're likely withdrawing dollars from their accounts. So we need to make sure we're doing that in the most tax efficient way and understanding, what that is. If the dollars are coming from retirement accounts, they're subject to ordinary income taxes, which is higher than capital gains taxes in most situations. So understanding, where those assets are coming from, what those resources are, and what's the most tax efficient way to do that for the family.
Yes, absolutely.
Just one last thing I wanted to add, we've talked about both, the aging parent as well as the adult child that is helping to plan for that. And I think it's just a matter of, working with a professional or a professional team that's going to look at the full picture. So, in my practice, I'm a CPA and a financial planner, and I'm looking at the full financial picture, not just one piece of the pie, not just one investment account. I want to know what all those assets and liabilities are and how they're working and what the longer term plan is. But I'm also helping to coordinate with their other professionals. So that is a lot of times attorneys, they're practicing CPA, but it also comes up that somebody comes to me and says, hey, my parent is aging, I'm not sure where to go. And it's putting them in connection with you and your team to make sure that they know that they have a resource for aging. They may have a piece of property, and just helping to bring all of those pieces together. And I think that that's really important. I think a lot of professionals are maybe only looking at certain pieces of the pie, and I want to understand what the full, even though I'm not managing it, I want to understand what the full pie looks like and make sure that those individuals have what they need as they're making those really important financial decisions. So I appreciate you letting me share that.
No, absolutely. Well, I can't thank you enough, Genevieve George from Pelican Financial Planning and Wealth, to come in today and share everything with us. I absolutely love this topic. This is one of my favorite topics because I really would like the younger children, the younger generation to think ahead. And I thank my co-host, Doris.
Thank you.
Muscarella.
I just have one last question for her.
Please.
What is the best way to get a hold of you? I'm interested. I want to talk to you. What is the best way to get a hold of you?
Thank you. My website, pelicanfinancialplanning.com. And there is a link right there to set up a meeting, make it as easy as possible. As Andrea said, that initial discussion is absolutely free. I just want to help.
You know, even though she is located in Palm Beach, Florida, she has clients nationwide. You can always reach out to Genevieve, and all of her information will be down in the show notes. Thanks, everybody, for coming today. This was such a wonderful topic. I love this topic because I love to educate people in how to plan for long-term care. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Have a great day, everybody.
Senior Care Made Simple, an elder care podcast, has been brought to you by Horizon Care Services, your private duty choice in home care in South Florida. For more information on acquiring home care assistance, visit horizoncareservices.com.